there is a good amount of like astronaut-y plot. Astronaut-y. That's gonna be my smutty astronaut series. Astronaut-y. Hi, welcome back to the party. Welcome if you are new here. My name is Noelle. The 7 is my Enneagram type. And I thought it would be fun to just do some random casual book recommendations for books that I never see on booktube in particular, but really most of these I don't see on book internet in general, if at all or very often. And that's just a light disclaimer to say that's pretty biased towards the circles and the people and the reviewers that I follow. You might see these books all the time, I don't know, but I feel like book internet can often become this kind of echo chamber where we're always talking about and reviewing and gushing and hyping on the same books. And that's part of what makes it really fun, is that we all get to have this relatable reading experience together in the community for a hobby that's usually like so isolated. Like that's why this is such a fun niche, such a fun corner of the internet. However, there's still so many good books that we all read that don't get talked about enough. So that's my soapbox. And I have pulled a handful of books off my shelf and another handful from like the ether where that I read either from the library or audiobook or what have you. And there's not really any particular theme. I have a middle grade, I have a YA, I have a nonfiction, I have literary, I have fantasy, I have speculative. It's just a mixed bag. So if you want an underrated, underhyped recommendation, this is the place for you. Hi, welcome, happy to have you. And without much further preamble, I'm just gonna go right into it. Starting with Echo by Pam Munoz-Ryan. I just got chills again refreshing myself on the kind of ins and outs of this book. It's at least been 2 years since I read it for the first time, and I am now in this moment wanting to reread it and just throw all my TBR plans out the window. This is a middle grade. It has to do with 3 different main characters and one kind of like prequel set the stage folktale myth character, so to speak. And with each character child, they're going through a different like period of crisis in their lives, and between each of them is decades of a time jump. And the common thread through each POV is a magical harmonica, which is on the cover here, and on the spine is a little harmonica. And I don't want to say much more. It's such a beautiful story of family and music and destiny and the power of being yourself that I think is such a good message for kids to have, and standing up for what you believe in and standing up for the people that you love, and the identities that you have and the people that you love have. And, it's just so good, and the ending made me sob. There's one of my very first vlogs on this channel has a clip of me like sobbing over this book at the end. A kid's book. I did listen to this on audio, and I strongly, strongly recommend, because this book strongly features music. There's multiple POVs, and there's a different narrator for each POV. This does not have nearly enough readers, and it is kind of a backlisted book, but it is 100% worth your time. The next one that I have is a young adult novel, and I picked The Wild Ones by Nafisa Azad. This is a book that I talk about pretty regularly on my channel, but I rarely ever, if ever, see it talked about anywhere else. And it is such a special, beautiful, beautiful book. Not just the cover, which honestly deserves a place on this list for that alone. Like it's so stunning. It's so stunning. This is a young adult standalone fantasy. It was released last summer, I want to say. And this features our main character, Paheli, and has to do with her growing up very, very troubled, has a very hard childhood, ends up running away from home as a teenager, and is in this really tough spot, comes into contact with this mysterious young boy who gives her a star in the palm of her hand. And you have to suspend a lot of disbelief, as with all fantasy, but in particular, this book almost leans more towards mythology, magical realism than like, you know, your typical dragony spell-casting fantasy. You know what I mean? It's a lot more ethereal, a lot more metaphorical, and vibey, to be frank. But the content and the themes in this book are very, very dark and deep. So go in with knowledge about your trigger warnings, especially for like a YA book. So Paheli gets the star in her palm, which gives her access to this magical place called the Between, which is basically this endless corridor of magical doorways. And when you walk through one of these magical doorways, you end up in the middle of a new major city across the world. And so Paheli spends a lot of her time in the Between, going to different cities and seeking out other troubled young girls like her that need a place of safety to recuperate, to begin healing, to have sisterhood and love in their lives as they come to terms with and heal from their various traumas. So the story picks up with a whole cohort of this kind of sisterhood that Paheli calls the Wild Ones, and you follow their stories as these young girls go through the Between, because each other sister wild one that comes into the picture, she gets a star also, so that gives her access to the Between too. But there very quickly comes this other element that's really like the main plot of the book that strongly centers on this mysterious young boy that gave Paheli her freedom in the form of this magical star in her palm. And I don't want to tell you more. Again, it's just very much like be along for the ride. It's so beautifully written. There are so many stunning, stunning lines and moments and imagery and sensory details. I just specifically remember the food writing in particular is just like outstanding. It's a special, special book, and it deserves more readers. I have a whole live show because this was a book club pick of mine. So I do have a live show where we discuss this book mostly spoiler free if you want even more reason to check it out. And the author of the book even watched and commented on our book discussion. So that's pretty special too. Now we're gonna go into the adult books, of which there are many more than just one or two. The first one is The Book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki. And this has a lot more readers, I think, now because it just won the Women's Prize for Fiction earlier this year. And I think that was so deserved. It's the book that I hoped would win, and it did. I read this via audiobook as well, which was an excellent experience. And this book is so unique, and it is just a treasure, but it's very, very long. So don't be surprised about that. But I have to say, it didn't feel like it went on and on and on. It felt like the perfect length. I never felt like, ugh, this book is so long. It was perfect. This follows a young boy and the boy's mother who are grappling with the sudden death of his father and her husband, and all of the grief and complications and circumstances that happen following that, and trying to cope and continue on with their lives. And they end up coping in very different, very, not toxic, but complicated ways that end up kind of hurting each other. It's this relationship about this young boy and his mother and the ways that they independently grieve their father and her husband, and how that grief intertwines and affects each other. And the whole story is narrated by a book. Just wrap your head around that for a second. Benny, the young boy who's the main character, he finds this book or develops this ability, which is up for interpretation of what the ability actually is or represents. But he ends up hearing this narrator, this voice of this book, telling the story of his life to him. And it's a very unique storytelling method. There's so many little subplots that are so expertly woven through the story. I think about this book all the time. It's such a good read. I am really, really eager to go back through Ruth Ozeki's other couple of books that she's written, because I'm so like stunned by the power of this book and the impact that it really left on me. And I'm hopeful that now that it's won a major literary award, that will draw more readers to it, because it absolutely needs them, and I need more people to talk about this book with. So good. The next one on my list is The Atmospherians by I.L. McElroy, which is another book that I feel like I talk about pretty regularly, but I don't see talked about often elsewhere. Call me a hipster.
Actually, please don't. Please don't do that.
I just feel like if people gave this book a chance, it would be the talk of the freaking town. Like, okay, this book is about a canceled influencer and her toxic best friend who's a failed actor, like extra actor, and they team up to form a cult in the woods to torture / reform problematic men. And it is spectacular satire, like some of the best satire I've ever read, and it is just a whirlwind. It is a wild ride. It is so funny, but also so dark. It's just such a good use of satire and humor to poke at and get under the skin of so many like social issues, social commentary, all of the issues that it brings up. It's just such a smart book, but it shouldn't be intimidating. It's very approachable. It's very fast paced, very easy to read, simply hilarious. Like, I was laughing out loud constantly while reading it. And it's fantastic. And I know that they're working on another book right now, and I will be eagerly awaiting the moment that I can pre-order it, because I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed, and everyone should read this. Next, I have The Friend by Sigrid Nunez. And this is funny because I picked it up because of the fun cover and it being partly about a dog, and it's super short, and I saw it had won the National Book Award. Like, it really checks all the boxes, and then it sat on my shelf for a while until I ended up reading it to fulfill a prompt during Read or Dare this year, which is like a very chaotic weekend readathon that I host with some friends. And this was the one that I read during Read or Dare. It did not really fit the vibe of Read or Dare, which is very like fun and chaotic, because this is very melancholy and dark and focuses a lot on grief and healing and companionship. And it's very meandering for a pretty short book, but I catch myself constantly thinking about it. This is about a woman who is a writer who does not like dogs, and she unexpectedly loses her best friend. Like, he dies. And she ends up taking care of his dog, and through caring for this dog, that introduces a whole bunch of new complications to her life, understandably. It's also not just any dog, it's like a gigantic Great Dane. You could see on the cover. Through her caring for this dog, she finds kind of a whole new side of her friend that she can't even explain to him, and she explores this very unique sense of grief and understanding through her writing, through her journaling, through her internal monologue. It feels very stream of consciousness. It feels very literary fiction, but so good. I have been on my literary fiction character arc this year. Like, I've read so much lit fic in 2022, and oddly enough, like, this is one that sticks most in my head, which I really did not expect. It's very sad. It's pretty hard to read at times, both because of what this woman is dealing with and also just the circumstances and series of events that happen within the novel. But if you need a good cry, I recommend. It's so good. And the fact that it won an award, the fact that I see it at bookstores all the time, it's like I still feel like I don't hear anyone talk about it. So I'm talking about it, and you should read it if you're in the mood. You know, it's very specifically like you have to be in the mood for like a melancholy stream of consciousness, sad book about a dog. you know. The next one is Black Girls Must Die Exhausted by Jane Allen. This is a contemporary release that came out in the last year or two. And again, it's like, I feel like I don't see it talked about as often as it really should be, because this book really took me by surprise. Our main character, Tabitha, has, like, on paper, the perfect life. She has her dream job. She has this great boyfriend. She has a loving family. She has a regular hairstylist. Like, all of her things that she had wanted for her life, she has them, except she doesn't have, like, the family of her own. Like, she doesn't have kids. She doesn't have the husband. And she goes to a doctor's appointment and they tell her, this is all in the synopsis, like none of this is spoilers, obviously. They tell her, hey, because of stress, because of your super, super badass big girl job, she works in TV, because of stress, your egg reserve is depleting faster than most women your age. Like, we don't know if you're going to have the chance or the time to have the family that you want to have on the timeline that you thought you would have. So that sends her on this tailspin, because now she has to have this conversation with her boyfriend where she didn't think they were there yet. Meanwhile, there's stuff going on at her job where she's facing discrimination, sexism, and racism. And meanwhile, there's also stuff going on in her complicated family, and she has a good relationship with most people in her family, from her grandmother to her parents, and yet there are tensions there that escalate kind of at the same time. A lot of the other aspects of her life are escalating. There's also, like, complicated friendships that feel very realistic that I thought were dealt with very well. The end of this book also made me cry. Maybe I just wanted to recommend you underrated sad books in particular. That was not the intention of this video. It was a very, very good ending, but very, very powerful. I also think about this book all the time, so you better do it. You better get on it. I loved it so much. I loved it so much. Okay, the next couple of these are gonna be more fantasy sci-fi-ish than the few before. Were more like literary, I guess. And the first of these that I have is Outlawed by Anna North. I feel like I've seen this around based on the cool cover. It was a book of the month pick a while back, but I have mostly only heard people saying that it just wasn't what they thought it would be, or that it was disappointing. And I just have to say that I disagree. I think this book did exactly what it was trying to do, which was have a good old rootin' tootin' Western time, but without without the toxicity and, like, problematic things that come along with it, including this is mostly a cast of women and non-binary characters, and has to do with not the historical American Wild West per se. It's more of like, after this big sweeping flu across the country, it sends the US almost into this period of a reset where, like, 9 out of 10 people have died. This new religion kind of crops up that heavily emphasizes women having babies, you know, because most of the population was just wiped off the face of the earth. And as a consequence of that, women that are unable to have children are called barren women, and they don't have any understanding for what might be the reason of that. They just see those women as a curse. You know, it's like goes against the keystone of this religion for women not to be able to have children. And so they will outcast at best, and kill or harm these women at worst. Our main character turns out to be one of these barren women. And so she is cast out from her town, and from there, it just gets wilder and wilder. Okay, she ends up in this outlaw crew of other barren folks that they have to organize, you know, these outlaw crimes in order to sustain their way of life. And I thought the ending was weird. I thought a lot of the things that go on in this book were weird, but in just the best way. Like, this was a lot of fun. It really made me think. I fell in love with the characters, and it's very short. Like, I wish it was twice as long. I included this book to say that if you've seen it but don't know really what to think of it or make of the reviews, I will be a voice of the people that really, really like this book. I think I gave this a 4 stars when I read it. I very much enjoyed myself, and I want more of this kind of modern Western, I guess. Modern Western with a lot of social commentary at the same time. The next one is Daughters of Sparta by Claire Haywood. And let me tell you, this book really took me by surprise. I read an arc of it in like a NetGalley reading vlog that I did. I ended up being so swept away and just astounded by the depth and power of this book. It follows 2 sisters, kind of similar to like the women of Troy, I think I've been told at least, where it's Helen of Troy and her sister Nestra, or Clytemnestra, but they mostly call her Nestra in this book, which I appreciated because that's a hard name for me to say. This deals with like the behind the scenes of the Greek myth surrounding the siege of Troy and the decades leading up to that, the actual siege of Troy and the fallout that happens afterwards, which mostly we hear about in mythology, the siege of Troy itself and the politics and the fighting and the men and that kind of action-y drama. Rarely do we get a peek behind the curtain of what the women are doing and all of the other quiet pieces that are moving behind the scenes, you know, to be seen and not heard, all of that. And it starts with Helen and Nestra as children in this big, powerful family, and what happens as they grow up, as they're married off, as they have babies, as the siege of Troy kicks off, and how Helen is involved, how Nestra is involved, how everything shakes out, and it is heartbreaking. It is tough to get through at times, but it is so good. If you like Greek mythology, I am begging you to read this book and report back to me, because it's one of the best ones. I've read a lot of Greek mythology retellings. It's one of the best, I'll say it. Next I have In the Quick by Kate Hope Day. This is a pretty short book, and I want to say it's a recent release in the last couple of years. And the way that I describe this, which take with a grain of salt because I haven't actually read Sally Rooney, but to me it feels like if Sally Rooney wrote sci-fi, because one, it doesn't use quotation marks. You just know what is the dialogue and what isn't. And two, it just so happens to be that the main character is interested in like astrophysics and becoming an astronaut, but it's not really about that. It's about that character's inner world and about her growing up and her relationships and her mental space. And it becomes pretty clear, I don't know if it's ever actually said, but it becomes pretty clear that she's neurodivergent in the way that she interacts with the world and with her job and with her fellow astronauts and engineers. This book is like unlike anything I've ever read. I felt so deeply for the main character and for all of the things that go on in her life. There is a good amount of like astronauty plot. Astronauty. That's gonna be my smutty astronaut series. Astronauty. There's a good amount of plot that goes on, but it is mostly about her emotional life and her moving through the world. It's hard for me to really explain that, but I feel like you know what I mean. There's so many morally gray characters and sketchy moments, and it does such a good job of explaining very sciencey things in layman's terms that doesn't feel dumbed down. It feels like you're just understanding, like the astrophysics, the space travel, all of that stuff. It felt very natural. It felt very organic, and I loved it. It made me want to read Kate Hope Day's backlist as well, because I know she has a handful of other sci-fi books that she's also written, so I will be getting to those soon. But you should start with In the Quick. Freaking read it. People need to talk about it more. Okay, last of my like sci-fi fantasy section is Where the Wild Ladies Are by Aoka Matsuda. And this is a collection of short stories translated from Japanese, but all of the stories are kind of related. Like there is a thread that connects all of them. This is me annotating, by the way. There's like 4 tabs in here. That's the closest I get to annotating anything. Every single story is a retelling of a traditional Japanese folktale, but with an empowered feminist twist. And at the end of the book, it tells you what each original folktale is, so you get an idea of how they were altered, how they were changed, which I thought was so fascinating. It's such a genius and cool concept. Like, I want all of these across a whole bunch of other cultures. Like, I want more of this, you know? And a lot of Japanese folktales have to do with spirits and ghosts and paranormal elements. So do all of these short stories. It felt like a very paranormal kind of a read, but in a more unsettling way. Like magical realism meets paranormal. I don't know if that really makes sense. It's very much like urban fantasy, but there are those little extra paranormal elements, I guess. It is hard to explain, but boy, I really loved it. And I want to reread it because the more you go, like the order of the stories is laid out so that you start to pick up more of the threads that connect everything as you go on. And I want to read it again, knowing 1, all of the original folktales, and 2, how I can see the threads connecting again. It is one of those books that you could reread a few times and find something new every time, which, how does the saying go? Books worth reading are worth rereading, or something like that. And that is definitely true for this one. So if you want a good short story collection, that is the one for you, my friend. And very last, I have 1 nonfiction on this list. I could have picked so many underrated nonfiction books, but the one I landed on for this video is Eat a Peach by David Chang. This is his memoir of being a celebrity chef. If you don't know who David Chang is, that's okay. Like, this memoir I think would still hit really hard, regardless of whether you know that he's a celebrity chef or not. If you do know who Dave Chang is, and you know of his restaurants, you know of his cookbooks, you know of his documentary series Ugly Delicious, then you will like this even more. It's a very like honest and generous memoir that he shares, where the ugly parts are here too. It's not like a celebrity memoir that tries to just share the good parts and like redeem themselves as a person. It feels very much like he's sharing the parts of himself that he's not proud of, the struggles that he's had with depression, with addiction, with mistakes, big mistakes he's made in his career, regrets that he has. Like, there is a lot of depth and darkness to this memoir as well, and it's something I really respected about this memoir in particular. Plus, I just loved learning more about him and about his kind of rise to this incredible success. He kind of structures it in the way of the timeline being as he opens each restaurant and as his success kind of scales into like celebrity chef status, where originally he had his 1 restaurant and then he had 2 restaurants, and then he opens more and more and more. He has all these other projects. He has all these other people that he's answering to. And you could see how things spiral out of control for him and the struggles that he does face and encounters, because it's written in this way that feels very off the rails. I own this now, obviously, but I did love the audiobook for this too, because it's narrated by the man himself. So that was really special. And there's a couple of really awesome author's notes in there too. Again, I just found it very, very raw. I read a lot of memoirs. I like a good memoir, and this is a good memoir. I'll leave it at that. Okay, so here's a stack of books that I really love, that I think more people should read and talk about on the internet. That's the video. Let me know what you think of this video. I would love to hear your thoughts, especially if you have read any of these or have thoughts about any of these, or if there's other books, like favorite books that you have that you would love to see talked about more on Bookish Internet. Tell me all the things. If you like this video, you can give it a like and subscribe if you want to see more from me. And otherwise, you're welcome to come hang out with me on Instagram at Noelle7Pages. I am there pretty much all the time. Would love to have you. Thank you so much for watching. Give your dog a big hug for me, and I will see you very soon. Love you, bye!